Hello and welcome back. Today's topic is rhetorical figures, the most difficult art for the students. And this time it is about the part 4. And in this part 4, we are dealing with apostrophe and interrogation. And on the second part, that means on part 5, we will be dealing with other two rhetorical figures that synecdoche and metonymy. So in this part, we are simply going to deal with apostrophe and interrogation. So without wasting time, let us go to first the apostrophe. So what is apostrophe? Apostrophe is a figure of speech, definitely, in which a speaker directly addresses someone or something that is not present or cannot respond in reality. So there is definitely a speaker and there is an address. The entity being addressed can be an absent, dead, or imaginary person. But it can also be inanimate object like the stars or the ocean, an abstract idea like love, fate, beauty, etc., or a being such as a muse or God. So practically in apostrophe, you have this idea of an address and a speaker. More to understand here. Apostrophe, the figure of speech, should not be confused with the apostrophe, the punctuation mark. Oftentimes, it happens that apostrophe or by apostrophe, we suggest the apostrophe mark. For example, Sachin Tendulkar's, and there is that apostrophe. This is not that type of apostrophe. An apostrophe is often introduced by the exclamation "Oh," as when Juliet cries out in Romeo and Juliet, "Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?" So see here, "Oh." O Milton, thou shouldst be living at this hour. Look here, O. So this O is present in apostrophe. And it always addresses its object in the second person. Sometimes this address involves the word you or more formal thou, as if in Shakespearean language. Other times, the you is not included. As when the narrator of Herman Melville's story, Bartleby, the scrivener ends his tale with this despairing apostrophe, "Ah, Bartleby, ah, humanity." So you have this notification to you that in an apostrophe, there must be the second person you or thou, or in absent, it is clearly like the being, as here in a Bartleby, the humanity. Now it is time for the examples. And in examples, you have the first one is apostrophe in Shakespeare's Macbeth. Now, Shakespeare's Macbeth in Macbeth, Macbeth is struggling with whether to follow through with a planned murder. He sees an apparition of a dagger and addresses it. It is a very renowned and a very notable scene, dagger scene, Act 2, Scene 1, line 33 to 64. And in these lines, the just few of the lines are here quoted. In this, is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still, etc. and etc. Here, the apostrophe pops up all over the place in Shakespeare. We know all about it, as the characters often addresses abstract ideas or inanimate objects while on stage. For example, here, the person Macbeth, the hero, the protagonist Macbeth, is addressing towards the dagger. Is this the dagger which I see before me? So this is a good example of an apostrophe. Another one is an ode on a Grecian urn by Keats. Here, Keats speaks to a beautiful ancient vase, addressing it as a bride, a child, and a historian, and also as a kind of muse, who would speak, would write more eloquently than Keats himself. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, Sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme. So, what you need to do, you have to follow apostrophe in this. That first comes the identification of apostrophe, second the explanation, third the examples. And here you can use these two examples rightfully. More examples to come. Now, moving on to the next slide to get the idea on apostrophe and personification. Do not confuse these two terms. Apostrophe often involves the speaker or writer addressing an inanimate object or abstract idea. In doing so, the speaker or writer will often impart to the object human characteristics. The object, in other words, gets personified. Take these two lines from William Wordsworth's Prelude. There was a boy, ye knew him well, eclipse and islands of Hawaii. Now, here in these two lines, performing an apostrophe in which the speaker addresses the cliffs and islands. Wordsworth personifies those cliffs and islands by imagining them as capable of knowing someone. So This is apostrophe where personification is also getting its hand. However, though apostrophe often involves personification of inanimate objects or abstract ideas, it certainly doesn't always. For instance, in the example below from the end of James Joyce's novel A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, Joyce has his main character Stephen Dedalus addresses life, but without ascribing any human qualities to it. First, you need to understand in this first example of Prelude, there was a boy and knew him well. There are simultaneous usages of apostrophe and personification. In the second example that I'm going to give, in these lines, Amen, so be it welcome, O life, I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience and to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race. Here, Stephen simply addresses life as it is, as something to be experienced, and not as something that itself has experiences or feelings or acts in any other way like a human. So if life acts like a human, it will be personification, not apostrophe. So in the first example of preludes, you have the examples of apostrophe and personification simultaneously. Personification where the poet addresses something, for example, life, which enacts its own performances, or addressing a table which speaks, or addressing a pen which speaks and sings. These are the examples of personification. Simultaneous apostrophe could be used in these cases. But here in Stephen Dedelas's case, A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, James Joyce used life as an apostrophe, not a personification, example of personification. So this is a basic difference between apostrophe and personification. Now moving on to the next interrogation or rhetorical question, the second rhetorical figure. Now, a rhetorical question is a figure of speech in which a question is asked for a reason other than to get an answer. Most commonly, it's asked to make a persuasive point. So, usually we ask questions. For example, what is your name? So, I'm demanding the answer as your name. But a rhetorical question or interrogation is not that type of rhetorical figure. It is a question that gives a persuasive point. That means most commonly it is a question that is asked for a reason rather than to get an answer. So there must be a reason. For example, if a person asks, how many times do I have to tell you not to eat my dessert? He or she doesn't want to know the exact number of times. The request will need to be repeated. Rather, the speaker's goal is to emphasize his or her growing frustration and ideally change the dessert thief's behavior. So, what is here that you are going to express your dissatisfaction, express your frustration through this rhetorical question. So, do I have to remind you that not to get my dessert at all? So, how many times do I have to tell you not to eat my dessert? It means this is my frustration. This is not a question. How many times do I have to tell you, or do I have to remind you not to touch my towel? How many times do I have to remind you not to take my pen? So, I'm not asking the exact number of times, say 4 times, 10 times, etc. I'm asking because I want to express my frustration towards you. This is a rhetorical question or interrogation, the rhetorical figure. Now, more again to learn, rhetorical questions are also sometimes called erotema. So, there is another term for rhetorical question, it is called erotema. Rhetorical questions are a type of figurative language. They are questions that have another layer of meaning on top of their literal meaning. Because rhetorical questions challenge the listener, raise doubt, and help emphasize ideas. They appear often in songs and speeches as well as in literature. So these are the factors you need to know from about rhetorical question or the interrogation, the rhetorical figure. Now, again, this is the time for examples. Rhetorical questions in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. In the soliloquy in Act 2, Scene 2, Romeo and Juliet poses a series of rhetorical questions as she struggles to grasp the difficult truth that her beloved Romeo is a member of Montague family. So these are the lines that you have to understand. And see here, I have already marked these lines. What's Montague or what's in a name? Very famous quotation, what's in a name, that which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that sheer perfection which he owes without the title, Romeo, doff thy name, and for that name which is no part of the take all myself. So these are the rhetorical questions. These are not a direct question that I'm asking. Please give me the answer. This is a question. This is a confusion. Rather, I'm expressing my confusion. Juliet is expressing the confusion at that moment. So this is a very good example from Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare. Shakespeare is always a genius. Another question from The Merchant of Venice. Another example. Here in the speech, Act 3, Scene 1 of Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, Shylock uses rhetorical questions to point out the indisputable similarities between Jews and Christians in such a way that any listener would find him impossible to contradict. This is the contradiction. Long passage, again a very famous passage in Act 3, Scene 1. A Jew hath not a Jew eyes, hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hot with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is. So this is not a question. This is rather a justification. This is rather an explanation of your idea. So the rhetorical question or interrogation doesn't seem to be a simple question. Rather, it is an explanation. And in these two examples, in these two cases, you have the idea how these examples are given. Now, moving again to the aporia, another concept that should not be confused, that should not be mixed up with the idea of rhetorical question. What is aporia? If the expression of doubt is earnest, however, then the question is not rhetorical. An example of aporia that is not also a rhetorical question comes from the most famous excerpt of Shakespeare's Hamlet. The most notable, to be or not to be, that is the question whether it's nobler to the mind to suffer, sings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing them Act 3, Scene 1, lines 59 to 61. While Hamlet asks this question without expecting an answer, he is alone when he asks it. He is not asking in order to persuade or make a point. It's a legitimate expression of doubt, which leads Hamlet into a philosophical debate about whether one should face the expected miseries of life or kill oneself and face the possible unknown terrors of death. It's therefore not a rhetorical question because Hamlet asks the question as an opening to actually seek an answer to the question he is obsessing over. So sometimes it happens that you are in demand of the question, you are again on the demand of the answer. So if you are raising a question, if you are asking a question, it means that you are demanding some answers definitely, and you are searching it. So not all the time that rhetorical questions suggest your frustration or your whereabouts or your ideas or your thought process. Rather, sometimes it becomes an aporia that I am stuck in a place where I'm not getting an answer. So I am in search of that answer. I am demanding the answer. In those cases, it should not be confused and mixed up with the rhetorical question and aporia. So this is aporia. You have to understand it carefully. Moving next slide, that there are few more examples that you have to give. These are jumbled as if that these questions, these rhetorical questions are, or the rhetorical parts like apostrophe and questions, there are so many, there are jumbled. Just in one clip, you have all the settled. So these are examples. What you have to do, just find out which one is a rhetorical question or not, which one is an apostrophe or not. It is a task that you have to do, you have to perform. So just pause the video and take one example, each one, and just justify whether this is a rhetorical question or whether this is an aporia or whether this is an apostrophe or not. Now, right now we are here to understand the possible sources. So I have found these three possible sources and significant one where you can get your answers properly. Well, I have tried my best to give you the answers. Still, if you need more, you can go through these websites. You have the idea. You will be getting more ideas from these websites. Thank you very much, viewers, to watch this video for you. I'm very grateful. Until the next part comes, okay, stay healthy, stay blessed. We will be meeting with the more two understandable rhetorical figures again, that is synecdoche and metonymy. Thank you.